My son took me on a vacation. I realized the truth when we reached the airport. I never imagined a promise of love could turn into a moment of quiet betrayal. What happened next changed the way I see my own family forever. Please like this video and listen to my story till the end, and let me know in the comments which city you are from so I can see how far my story has traveled. I still remember the way my son smiled when he told me we were going on a vacation. It wasn't the wide, careless smile he used to have as a boy, but a careful one, measured, polite, almost rehearsed. Still, it warmed me. At my age, you learn not to ask too many questions when love shows up unexpectedly. "Pack light, Mom," he said. "Just a few days, somewhere calm." I hadn't traveled in years, not since my husband passed. The idea of leaving the house, of leaving the routines that had become my safety, felt both exciting and frightening. My knees weren't what they used to be. My back ached if I stood too long. And yet, the thought that my son wanted to spend time with me made my chest feel lighter than it had in months. I said yes before fear could speak louder. That evening, I pulled my old suitcase from the closet. It still had a faded airline sticker from a trip my husband and I once took when life felt simpler. I ran my fingers over it, remembering how he used to insist on carrying it for me, even when I told him I could manage. I whispered his name without realizing it. Packing took longer than it should have, not because I didn't know what to bring, but because every item carried a memory. The blue sweater I wore when my son graduated college, the soft scarf my sister gave me before she moved away, comfortable shoes because vanity stops mattering when balance becomes more important than beauty. I packed slowly, deliberately, as if giving myself time would help me understand why this trip felt different. I didn't tell anyone about the vacation, not my neighbor who checks in on me, not the ladies from church. Something about it felt private, almost fragile, like if I spoke it aloud, it might disappear, or worse, reveal itself for what it truly was. The night before we left, I barely slept. My mind wandered through old worries, the kind that come with age. Would I slow him down? Would I forget something important? Would he get impatient with me the way people sometimes do when you need extra time? I reminded myself that this was my son, the boy I carried for 9 months, the child whose scraped knees I kissed, whose fevers I stayed up through, whose dreams I believed in long before he did. He wouldn't hurt me. Morning came too quickly. He arrived early, tapping on the door instead of using his key. That alone should have told me something had shifted between us, but I brushed the thought aside. People change, lives get busy, distance grows quietly like dust. He carried my suitcase to the car and placed it in the trunk without comment. I noticed how light it was, how little of myself I was taking with me. I still remember the way my son smiled when he told me we were going on a vacation. It wasn't the wide, careless smile he used to have as a boy, but a careful one, measured, polite, almost rehearsed. Still, it warmed me. At my age, you learn not to ask too many questions when love shows up unexpectedly. "Pack light, Mom," he said. "Just a few days, somewhere calm." I hadn't traveled in years, not since my husband passed. The idea of leaving the house, of leaving the routines that had become my safety, felt both exciting and frightening. My knees weren't what they used to be. My back ached if I stood too long. And yet, the thought that my son wanted to spend time with me made my chest feel lighter than it had in months. I said yes before fear could speak louder. That evening, I pulled my old suitcase from the closet. It still had a faded airline sticker from a trip my husband and I once took when life felt simpler. I ran my fingers over it, remembering how he used to insist on carrying it for me, even when I told him I could manage. I whispered his name without realizing it. Packing took longer than it should have, not because I didn't know what to bring, but because every item carried a memory. The blue sweater I wore when my son graduated college, the soft scarf my sister gave me before she moved away, comfortable shoes because vanity stops mattering when balance becomes more important than beauty. I packed slowly, deliberately, as if giving myself time would help me understand why this trip felt different. I didn't tell anyone about the vacation. Not my neighbor who checks in on me, not the ladies from church. Something about it felt private, almost fragile, like if I spoke it aloud, it might disappear, or worse, reveal itself for what it truly was. The night before we left, I barely slept. My mind wandered through old worries, the kind that come with age. Would I slow him down? Would I forget something important? Would he get impatient with me the way people sometimes do when you need extra time? I reminded myself that this was my son, the boy I carried for 9 months, the child whose scraped knees I kissed, whose fevers I stayed up through, whose dreams I believed in long before he did. He wouldn't hurt me. Morning came too quickly. He arrived early, tapping on the door instead of using his key. That alone should have told me something had shifted between us, but I brushed the thought aside. People change, lives get busy, distance grows quietly like dust. He carried my suitcase to the car and placed it in the trunk without comment. I noticed how light it was, how little of myself I was taking with me. The drive was quiet, not uncomfortable but restrained. He asked if I was warm enough, if I needed water. Practical questions, safe ones. I watched the road stretch ahead of us and told myself not to read meaning into silence. As we merged onto the highway, I felt something unfamiliar settle in my chest. Not fear exactly, but awareness. The kind that comes when you realize you're no longer the one steering your own life. I tried to make conversation. I asked about work, about his wife, about the weather, even though we were sitting in the same car. He answered politely, briefly, eyes fixed forward. His hands gripped the steering wheel a little too tightly. I told myself he was tired. At one point, I reached into my purse to check that I had my ID. It was there, tucked into the side pocket where I always kept it. I felt reassured. Documents matter when you're older. They're proof you still exist in systems that prefer efficiency over humanity. When we pulled up to the airport, my heart fluttered. Airports always did that to me. Something about movement, about people going places, about possibility. Even now, surrounded by noise and rushing bodies, I felt young for a moment. My son took my suitcase again. I followed him inside, my steps slower than his, but steady. He walked a few feet ahead, not quite beside me, not quite leaving me behind. That space between us felt larger than the terminal. At the check-in counter, he handed over the documents, all of them. I stood quietly to the side, smiling when the agent glanced at me. I was used to this, being spoken for, not out of malice, but convenience. Still, a small part of me bristled. When the agent asked if we were checking bags, she looked at him, not me. "Yes," he said, "just one." Just one, as if that explained everything. We moved towards security. I noticed how he kept my boarding pass. I didn't ask for it. I didn't want to seem ungrateful. Mothers of a certain age learn to make themselves smaller so their children don't feel burdened. As we waited in line, I studied the faces around us. Families laughing, couples arguing softly, a young woman crying into her phone, everyone carrying their own story, their own destination. I wondered where mine led. "Are you excited?" he asked, suddenly. "Yes," I said, and meant it. Even with the unease curling in my stomach, I was excited. Hope does that. It survives logic. After security, we sat near the gate. He checked his phone repeatedly. I folded my hands in my lap and watched planes taxi past the window, their massive bodies moving with surprising grace. I thought about how long it had been since someone planned something for me, since I was invited instead of included by default. That gratitude softened my doubts. I leaned back in the chair and closed my eyes for a moment, listening to the hum of the airport. I told myself this trip was a gift, a chance to rest, to feel cared for. I didn't know yet that gifts can sometimes be wrapped around decisions you never agreed to make. But at that moment, sitting there with my son, my suitcase somewhere behind a counter, my life condensed into a few folded clothes, I believed him. I believed the vacation was real. And that belief, more than anything else, is what made what came next hurt the most. Airports have a way of making people feel both important and invisible at the same time. Everyone is going somewhere, and no one is really seen. Sitting there beside my son, I felt that contradiction settle into my bones. He sat a few chairs away from me, not far enough to seem distant, not close enough to feel connected. His phone stayed in his hand, screen lighting up his face again and again. Every vibration made his jaw tighten. I wondered who he was talking to, but I didn't ask. Mothers who ask too many questions are often accused of prying. I had learned that lesson late in life. The gate area filled slowly. People dragged carry-ons, children sprawled on the carpet with tablets glowing in their hands. Couples leaned into each other like they were afraid of being separated by the noise. I watched all of it quietly, my hands folded in my lap, my purse tucked against my side, as if it were the last thing that belonged only to me. An announcement echoed overhead. The words blurred together. Flight numbers, boarding groups, destinations that meant nothing to me yet. I waited to hear ours, but I didn't know what it was. That realization came softly, like a draft through a cracked door. I didn't know where we were going. That should have bothered me more than it did. Instead, I told myself it was a surprise. Children like surprises. Adults plan them. Parents accept them graciously. I shifted in my seat, my knees stiff from sitting too long. My son glanced over, noticed, and immediately stood. "Do you need anything?" he asked, his voice careful. "No, I'm fine," I said. He nodded, relief flickering across his face too quickly. He sat back down, farther this time. The space between us felt intentional now. A woman across from us caught my eye. She smiled politely, the way strangers do when they share a moment of recognition. I smiled back. For a brief second, I wanted to lean toward her and say something, anything. I wanted to hear my own voice in this place, to remind myself I still existed beyond my son's orbit. But I stayed silent. When boarding began, my son stood immediately. He gathered our documents from his jacket pocket and gestured for me to rise. I moved slowly, feeling the familiar ache in my hips. He didn't offer his arm, but he waited. That felt like kindness, even if it was the bare minimum. At the desk, the agent scanned his pass, then mine. She glanced up at me, smiled briefly, and then looked back at him. "Is she traveling with you today?" she asked. "Yes," he said quickly. Not my mother, not my name, just yes. She nodded and waved us through. We walked down the jet bridge, the tunnel narrowing our world to metal walls and recycled air. My steps echoed behind his. I noticed how he never once turned around to check on me. He knew I was there. He always assumed I would follow. The plane smelled faintly of coffee and something industrial. We found our seats, aisle for him, window for me. I preferred aisle seats, but I didn't say anything. I hadn't chosen this arrangement. I hadn't chosen much of anything. As I settled in, I noticed the boarding pass tucked in the seat pocket in front of me. I pulled it out slowly, my fingers clumsier than they used to be. The print was small. I leaned closer. One way. I stared at that detail longer than I should have. One-way tickets aren't unusual. People travel one way all the time. But vacations, real vacations, usually have a return, a coming back, a sense of temporary escape. I slid the pass back into the pocket before my son noticed. My heart thudded softly, not in panic, but in recognition. Something didn't fit. As the plane filled, a flight attendant stopped beside us. "Are you two traveling together?" she asked kindly. "Yes," my son answered again. She smiled at me. "Are you comfortable? Let us know if you need anything." I nodded. My mouth opened, but nothing came out. The plane taxied. My hands tightened around the armrests. I wasn't afraid of flying. I was afraid of what I didn't know. Once we were in the air, my son finally relaxed. He leaned back, closed his eyes, exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for hours. I watched him, trying to read his face the way I used to when he was a child. Back then, I could tell if he was lying by the way his eyebrows twitched. Now, his face was a wall. I stared out the window, clouds drifting beneath us like unfinished thoughts. Somewhere above them was clarity. Somewhere below them was home. I wondered which direction we were headed. A drink cart rattled past. The flight attendant offered me water. I accepted gratefully, my throat dry. As she handed it to me, she asked gently, "Are you visiting family?" I hesitated. That pause felt dangerous. "Yes," my son said again, without looking at me. The attendant nodded and moved on. Something in me tightened then. Not anger, not fear, but grief. Grief for the way my answers were being replaced. Grief for the ease with which my story was rewritten. I took a sip of water and stared straight ahead. The hours passed slowly. I dozed, waking to the murmur of conversation, to the clink of cups, to my son typing messages he never shared with me. Each time I stirred, I checked the seat pocket again, as if the ticket might change its mind. It didn't. When the captain announced our descent, my stomach dropped, not from altitude, but from certainty. Whatever awaited us wasn't temporary. As we landed, applause rippled through the cabin. I didn't join in. I gathered my purse and waited for the doors to open. Inside the terminal, the air felt different, heavier, warmer. My son moved with purpose now, confidence returning to his stride. He knew this place. He knew where we were going. I followed. At baggage claim, he collected my suitcase and handed it to a man standing nearby. The man nodded at him, glanced at me, then took the handle without a word. "Who is he?" I asked softly. "A friend. He's helping." Helping with what? We walked to a car parked outside. The man loaded my suitcase into the trunk. My son opened the back door for me. The courtesy felt rehearsed. As the car pulled away from the airport, I watched the terminal disappear behind us. Something in my chest tightened painfully. "Where are we staying?" I asked. My son stared out the window. For a long moment, I thought he hadn't heard me. "Somewhere safe," he said finally. Safe. That word echoed louder than it should have. I thought about the house I'd left that morning, the photos on the mantel, the plant I forgot to water, the quiet hum of a life built slowly over decades. I realized then that I hadn't locked the door. I had assumed I'd be coming back. The car merged onto the highway. Signs flashed past, names I didn't recognize. I tried to memorize them, just in case. My son reached into his pocket and pulled out my phone. "Battery's low," he said. "I'll charge it for you." I watched him plug it into the dashboard without waiting for my response. Outside, the city unfolded. New streets, unfamiliar buildings, a future I hadn't agreed to. I didn't cry. I didn't confront him. Not yet. Because when you're a mother, even when your heart begins to break, you still hope there's a reason, a good one that makes the silence make sense. I leaned my head against the window and closed my eyes. The vacation, I realized then, wasn't about rest. It was about removal. And the hardest part wasn't that I had been brought somewhere new. It was that I had been taken away from myself without being asked. The car slowed down near a long stretch of buildings that all looked the same. Low, beige structures with small windows and neatly trimmed bushes out front. The kind of place designed to feel calm, neutral, unremarkable. I leaned forward slightly, trying to read the sign as we passed, but the letters blurred together before I could make sense of them. "Are we almost there?" I asked. "Yes," my son said. His voice was steady now, too steady. The word "there" hung between us, undefined. He didn't say hotel, he didn't say rental, he didn't say friend's house. He said there, as if the destination didn't need a name. The car turned into a wide driveway. A small booth stood at the entrance, with a man inside who waved us through after my son lowered the window and spoke briefly. I didn't hear what he said. I only noticed that the man didn't look surprised to see me. That was when the feeling in my chest changed. We parked near the front of one of the buildings. The man from the airport got out and opened the trunk. My suitcase was lifted again, passed from hand to hand like an object with no opinion about where it belonged. I stepped out of the car slowly. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and cut grass. A woman in a polo shirt stood by the entrance, clipboard tucked under her arm. She smiled at me, warm but practiced. "Welcome," she said. "We've been expecting you." The words landed harder than anything else that day. Expecting me. I turned toward my son. "What is this place?" He didn't answer right away. He thanked the driver, signed something on the clipboard, and then finally looked at me, really looked at me. His eyes were tired, not guilty tired, as if this moment had been rehearsed so many times in his head that the emotion had worn thin. "Mom," he said quietly, "let's just go inside." Inside, the building was bright, too bright. White walls, framed pictures of smiling older people doing activities I had never enjoyed, painting, stretching, laughing in groups, the kind of laughter that looks good in brochures. A woman approached us, her tone gentle, professional. "I'm the intake coordinator," she said. "We'll just need a few minutes of your time." Intake. That word settled into my bones like cold. I looked around. Other elderly people sat in chairs along the wall. Some stared straight ahead. Some dozed. A few watched us with mild curiosity, the way passengers watch newcomers board a train they've already accepted their riding. I felt suddenly aware of my posture, my clothes, my age. I felt myself shrinking, becoming one of them before I had agreed to be. "Is this a hotel?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. The coordinator smiled, the way people do when they don't want to contradict you directly. "It's a care residence," she said. "A very nice one." Care residence. I turned back to my son. "You said vacation." He swallowed. "This is a kind of break. For you." "For me," I repeated. "Yes," he said quickly. "You'll be taken care of. Meals, doctors, everything. You don't have to worry anymore." Worry. As if my life had been defined by inconvenience. The coordinator gestured toward a chair. "Why don't you sit for a moment?" she said to me. "We'll go over some paperwork." Paperwork. I sat. The chair was firm, unyielding. The clipboard was placed in front of my son, not me. Forms were explained to him, questions directed to him. I listened as if from underwater. "She has some mobility issues," he said. "She forgets things sometimes," he added. "She's safer here." Each sentence chipped away at something inside me, not because they were entirely untrue, but because they weren't his to offer. I tried to speak. My voice came out smaller than I expected. "Why didn't you tell me?" The room went quiet for just a moment, enough for everyone to hear. My son knelt in front of me, his face level with mine. "Because you would have said no." The honesty in that answer hurt more than any lie. I looked at him then, really looked at him, and saw not the boy I raised, but a man who had already decided, someone who had measured my life against his own and found it inconvenient. "You bought a one-way ticket," I said softly. He flinched, just slightly. "This isn't temporary," I said. He didn't deny it. I felt something settle in my chest, not panic, not hysteria, clarity, the kind that comes when the last thread of doubt finally snaps. This wasn't about rest. This wasn't about care. This was about being placed somewhere I wouldn't argue, wouldn't interrupt, wouldn't remind him of promises he didn't know how to keep. The coordinator cleared her throat. "We can give you both a moment," she said, and stepped away. I leaned back in the chair, suddenly very tired. Images flickered through my mind. My kitchen, my bed, the window where the afternoon light always landed just right. All the quiet choices that made a life feel like mine. "Did you think about asking me?" I asked. My son looked down. "I didn't think you'd understand." I nodded slowly. "So you decided for me?" He didn't answer. That silence told me everything. I realized then that the truth hadn't arrived all at once. It had been dripping into me since the moment he said, "Pack light," since the ticket, since the way my answers disappeared. But this was the moment it became undeniable. I wasn't visiting, I was being delivered. And the hardest part wasn't the place. It was understanding that the person who brought me here believed he was doing the right thing. He didn't speak right away. After the coordinator walked away, the room felt smaller, like the walls had leaned in to listen. My son stood with his hands clasped together, thumbs rubbing against each other the way they used to when he was nervous as a child. I hadn't seen that gesture in years, and for a brief moment it softened me. "Sit down," I said. He hesitated, then pulled a chair close and sat across from me. Not beside me, across, like a meeting. "I didn't plan it like this," he began. "It just happened." I waited. "You've been struggling," he said. "You don't see it the way everyone else does." Everyone else. I wondered when my life became a group discussion I wasn't invited to. "I forget things sometimes," I said calmly. "So do you." "It's more than that," he replied quickly. "You left the stove on. You missed an appointment. You almost fell last winter." "Almost," I repeated. He sighed, frustration slipping through his careful tone. "Mom, I can't be everywhere. I have work, I have my own family, I worry all the time." Worry, that word again, always used like a shield. I studied his face as he spoke, the lines around his eyes, the tension in his jaw. This wasn't cruelty, it was exhaustion mixed with fear, the kind that convinces people they're being merciful when they're really being decisive. "When did you start thinking about this?" I asked. He looked away. "After Dad died." That surprised me, not because it wasn't true, but because it was earlier than I expected. "You were lonely," he continued. "You didn't say it, but I could see it. You stopped calling as much. You stayed home. I didn't know how to help." I almost laughed then. Almost. Because I remembered those months clearly. I remembered waking up in a bed that felt too big, making 1 cup of coffee instead of 2, sitting in silence that wasn't empty, just unfamiliar. Loneliness isn't the same as helplessness. "I was grieving," I said. "I know, but grief doesn't get easier at your age." There it was, the sentence that finally named everything. At your age. I leaned back in my chair and let my mind drift, not away from the room, but backward through time. I remembered holding him for the first time, his small body curled against mine, his breathing uneven but determined. I remembered nights pacing the floor with him when he wouldn't sleep, whispering promises I had no idea how I would keep. I remembered working extra shifts so he could go to summer camp, selling my jewelry when money was tight, sitting through parent-teacher meetings alone because his father couldn't leave work. I remembered cheering at graduations, pretending not to notice when his phone calls became shorter, less frequent. I remembered letting go, slowly, intentionally, because that's what mothers are taught to do when their children grow up. I didn't stop being capable just because I got older, I said quietly. He rubbed his forehead. I know you think that, but from where I stand, you stand above me now, I interrupted. He looked up, startled. You stand above me, I repeated, not unkindly, deciding what's best, deciding what I can handle, deciding where I belong. That's not fair, he said. No, I agreed. It isn't. He leaned forward. This place is good, Mom. Really good. Nurses, activities, meals prepared. You won't be alone. Alone. I thought of my kitchen table, the sound of my neighbor's radio through the wall, the quiet satisfaction of choosing when to speak and when to rest. Alone is not the same as lonely. Did you visit it first? I asked. Yes. Did you imagine yourself here? He didn't answer. That silence was louder than anything else. I felt something loosen inside me then. Not anger, not heartbreak, but acceptance of a truth I'd been avoiding. He hadn't brought me here because he believed I deserved care. He brought me here because he needed relief. And that didn't make him evil, but it did make this wrong. I would have said no, I told him. I know. And you still did it. Yes. We sat with that honesty between us, raw, undeniable. I raised you to make hard choices, I said finally, but I also raised you to listen. His shoulders sagged. I didn't think you'd hear me. I smiled sadly. You didn't give me the chance. Footsteps echoed down the hall. The coordinator returned, holding a folder. She paused when she sensed the shift in the room. Take your time, she said gently. There's no rush. No rush. I wondered how long she'd been saying that to people like me. I stood slowly, my knees protesting. My son rose immediately, reaching out instinctively. I waved him off and steadied myself. I need to think, I said. He nodded. Of course. As I walked toward the window at the end of the hall, sunlight poured in, warm and unbothered. I placed my hand against the glass. For the first time that day, I wasn't thinking about what he wanted. I was thinking about what I needed. And that realization, quiet, steady, felt like the beginning of something he hadn't planned for.